All right. Hello and welcome to this training on the Partnership for Lead-Free Schools. This training is from the Department of Environmental Quality's Department of Drinking Water. I'm Matt Wycoff. I'm the division's representative for lead and copper. So all things lead or copper come through me, and that's my email there. So you'll also see more information from me as we go through. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start training. If you've come this far in the training, it's probably because you came into contact with one of these flyers here. This is a flyer that's been developed by the division for distribution for the 2018-2019 school year. It goes over some of our recommendations to avoid a risk of lead exposure in drinking water in schools. And so we'll go over its content, kind of why it was important enough for us to distribute. So the Partnership for Lead-Free Schools is a group that right now consists of the Utah Department of Environmental Quality, UFOMA, which is the Utah Facilities Operation and Maintenance Association, the Utah Health Department, and the Utah Lead Coalition. This flyer is also being distributed by the UEA, and so you might have received it through them. For the purpose of this, we include school districts, K-12 schools, preschools, charter schools, and daycare facilities. The reason for this is we're trying to get this information into the hands of anyone who's involved with a place where children routinely consume water. Water is one of the avenues which we know lead can get into, where children can consume lead, and so we want to get this information out there. So how does lead get into drinking water? Here we have a couple of different diagrams. Well, one diagram and a couple different pictures. The picture on the right is a corrosion cell, and you can see that water is coming down through the pipe, and we see a side cut of the pipe wall. So water, as it comes down, has elements in it that are strong oxidizers, including oxygen, chlorine, and other things. These oxidizers have the ability to oxidize. In this case, it's iron, but they can do it with copper and lead as well when you have an unprotected pipe wall like that. So generally speaking, we try to keep our pipes with a protective layer on there, but sometimes depending on the change in water chemistry, that protective layer on the side of the pipe can break down. And then the naked metal is then absorbed into the water system, which comes downstream. In the case of iron here, it's not as big of a deal, just kind of changes the color and the taste of the water. But when it happens to be lead is known to be toxic to humans and can create quite an issue. So why was lead used? Well, lead is one of the metals that was first used by humans. There's some reasons for that. It has a lot of characteristics that make it very easy and ideal to work with. Unfortunately, it is also toxic. So the picture on the upper left is actually a picture that comes from Bath, England, maybe a few of you have been there, and that is a lead pipe that was used by the Romans. Now, the reason that it's so easy to work with is it has a very low melting point. It's malleable. You can change it and bend it into a lot of different shapes. If you look at the picture on the bottom, that's a lead pigtail. Those were very common. Very common to be used throughout here in the United States. And you can see the bend that pipe has in it. That's something that you'd have a hard time doing with galvanized steel or some of the other metals. Lead also is a pretty poor conductor of electricity and a pretty poor conductor of heat. And as such, it tends to resist corrosion and it resists the transfer of heat. So in places that are cold, you would quite often see lead pipe being used. Now, Utah, there's a lot of places in it that obviously we're a cold environment, so lead was used. And also, we had a large population in the early 1900s. And so we're susceptible to having that kind of infrastructure. So the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, has released statistics on lead in children. Some of those statistics say that at least 4 million households have children in them that are being exposed to high level of leads. There are approximately 500,000 U.S. children, the ages 1 to 5, with blood lead levels above 5 micrograms per deciliter. This is a reference that the CD uses to decide when they're going to initiate action. I've heard some things and read some of the literature that says they're actually going to lower this level to 3 micrograms per deciliter. And so that'll be an interesting change when it happens. But the CDC has also said that there is no safe level safe lead level in children. So the damaging effects of lead actually happen at pretty low concentrations inside of the body. And we'll go over what some of those are. Here's something that's put out by the Mayo Clinic. Lead poisoning occurs when lead builds up in the body, often over months or years. Even small amounts of lead can cause serious health problems. Children younger than 6 are especially vulnerable to lead poisoning, which can severely affect mental and physical development. At very high levels, lead poisoning can also be fatal. So lead has been shown that it can replace needed elements in the body, such as calcium, zinc, manganese. So lead can come in and replace those needed elements inside of the body, but it's biologically inactive. And so it actually stops proteins from being formed the way that they're supposed to. And this is extremely terrible for children who are still developing. So it's stored in the bones, it's stored it has an increased ability in children to pass through the blood-brain barrier. And so it affects their development. And you see on the picture there on the right that it's been linked to lower IQs, decreased ability to pay attention. You see behavioral problems in children that have been exposed to lead and underperformance at school. And for this reason, it's really important for us to get this information out to administrators, to people who deal with children, to know that this could be a cause of some of the things that they're seeing inside of their schools. So in 2017, the Department of Drinking Water, the Department of Environmental Quality, received a letter from the EPA asking us to ask schools to start to sample for lead in their water. And so Utah's response to that letter was to initiate this 2017 pilot study for lead in drinking water. It was pretty successful. We were able to collect almost 1,700 samples. 83% of school districts participated, which is about 75% of schools. So we got a pretty good sample set here to be able to make some inferences about lead in our state. As you can see, about 2% were above the EPA's action level of 15 parts per billion. Now remember that the CDC said that there is no safe level for children and it can bioaccumulate. So this level put out by the EPA has to do with corrosion in pipes, and it's not necessarily an indication of safeness of the water. It's just where the EPA dictates that a system should start to act to clean up or look at the corrosion potential of that water. And that's for public water systems. So it's not necessarily done in schools. One of the interesting findings of this study was marked in red here, is that almost 40% of schools, Utah schools, tested between 1 part per billion and 15 parts per billion. So this is an area that the Division of Drinking Water that we found a little alarming, in an area that we want to pay attention to. And that's why we're doing this webinar today. So the Division of Drinking Water has some resources to help schools that want to look at lead levels inside of their schools. I'm assuming that if you came to the website here, you're familiar with you came to this training, you're familiar with our website. I want to go over some of the things of the website, some of the features of the website. Now, this website is most likely getting ready to change. We're going to update it, but the features here that I show you will be there after we do the changes to the website. One of the first things you'll notice is there's a link to that 2017 study. Any school that sends us samples after that would also, we archive your data here for you and make it so that not only do we archive it, but that people can see it, and it's a great tool for for transparency for all your schools. So you click into that and you go ahead and hit your run report here if you want. Oh, they did go ahead and did run our report. And so we can see all the schools who have tested. Now let's say we wanted to look up our own school. I went to school, grew up in Midvale, so we'll look at that. And if I can type, this is not my keyboard. So there we go, and it goes ahead and pulls up all the schools in Midvale that have either tested or well, actually it pulls up all the schools in Midvale. So you can see that all of them there have either tested below that 15 micrograms per liter EPA threshold, the action level, or that they just didn't submit any data. So that is one of the features that our website does. Going back to the website, you have some more stuff here, particularly the areas I want you to keep in mind are some of these areas at the bottom where we have different resources. Here, one of the ones that I wanted to show you is this one right here, these 3 T's for reducing lead in drinking water. This is something that's put out by the EPA. And a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about comes from here. So this is kind of the handbook that we use, and it should be used for dealing with lead in water. It's kind of an all-inclusive technical manual. It has about 104 pages, I believe, but you can access that through the website here. We also will have templates, things for submitting publication. If you wanted to do something, publish something for your school, this is where you'd come to be able to find that. So let's go back to the presentation. All right, so the division is making a couple of recommendations for the 2018-2019 school year in order to reduce the risk of exposure to lead. One of the first things we're going to ask is that your piping system should be flushed in any break longer than 1 week. Or as I put a caveat in here, it says, or as needed, determined by your testing. So your testing might show that you need a place that it should be flushed more frequently. But we wanted to keep something that was manageable. Some of the data that I'm seeing now shows that the leaching of these metals into the pipe happens in the first 24 hours of contact time. So it might be necessary that we flush more frequently, but we wanted to give something that was workable for the schools. And so we went with a week. But just know that that's not scientifically based. It's based on kind of a need for the schools and not to overburden them. The second thing is we would ask that you establish a regular testing schedule for your school. We recommend that be on an annual basis. And then we'll go about how you can set up both of these here in just a second. So flushing. So what does flushing do? Flushing removes water from the system that has been in contact with the piping for extended periods of time. So the longer that water is in contact with pipes, the more likely it is that you'll get some kind of a leaching event. Most of us has opened up a water source, a faucet that hasn't been used in 3-4 months, and the first 3-4 seconds of the water that comes out of that is a bright red color. That's from rust oxidation. That's from iron that has been leached from the pipes and comes out. So when we flush that, you get that out of the way, and the water that you can then drink has a much lower concentration of lead, copper, iron, other things that are in your water. So sources of drinking and culinary water should be flushed routinely. And then sources that are infrequently used can build up the highest concentrations of metals. I've got a picture here on the right of a utility sink that obviously hasn't been used in a bit. And so the water that's inside of that faucet, inside of that piping, inside of those walls has been in contact with that metal for quite a while. So we need to look at those kind of sources, not that people routinely drink out of those, but, let's say that's in a utility shed and the football team is out there, it's not uncommon for someone to fill up a water jug out of something that's been sitting for quite a while. All right, so here's some case studies. This one was taken from a school in Monticello, Illinois. This is the school superintendent, in this case, Vic Zimmerman. He used flushing to show that he was able to reduce the lead levels in his school. So this came from the local newspaper, and I thought it was a pretty good example of how someone got in the press for doing something good about lead and copper, or excuse me, just for lead. Here's another case study that was done that came out of a school in Utah. This was data from the 2017 study. I just went and I looked for somebody who had done some flushing, and I looked at their results. And so, as you can see, their first draw results, one of them was 14.09 micrograms per liter, and the other one is 3.44. But after flushing, they had a 73 and a 64.8% reduction in the amount of lead after just a 30-second flush. So this gives you some idea about how effective just a simple flush can be in reducing the amount of lead and other metals that are found in your piping. It's a pretty cost-effective way to go ahead and reduce the risk of exposure. So how do we do that? All right, so this is a pretty simple way. We just make the assignment. We'll develop a plan, and I'll go over how that goes. And then we create a logbook. Now, on the website there for the drinking water in schools, the lead in schools, I've gone ahead and I've made one for you. You can use this one if you choose. If not, you can go with something else. And this gives you just a simple way to create a flushing log. You will make this so it's available to you electronically, and you can keep your data, your records online. Or if you want to print this out, put it in a three-ring binder, that will work too. Here you can go ahead and you can label your school, and you can assign a lead representative for your school, and they'll be in charge of doing the flushing and or sampling if you choose to do so. So there on the left-hand column, you can see where it says flush site. You just go ahead and put down where you want your flushing to occur. And then there's a place for date and initials of someone who did that. So then you'll have a running log of how often an individual site was flushed and when it was done. So how do you go ahead and flush? For a long flush, when you've got a significant break in time in class, like say the children are coming back from summer break, it's nice to go ahead and flush out the entire building. So how that's done is you go to the faucet that's furthest away from the main line, and you let that run. And you can let it run for 10, well, it says here 10 minutes, and it says for best results, you can actually calculate out the volume. Most of you won't do that, I don't think. Or you'd have to go through and measure the diameter and length of all the pipes. And I don't think you really want to do that. So let it run till it's good, 10 minutes until it gets good and cold. And then that'll flush the lines. We do want to, the second step there says we want to actually flush out the drinking fountains or sinks or anywhere where it's going to be used for drinking or food, and let that run 30 seconds or so to a minute, or until the water is good and cold. This is also good advice for you to use in your homes, anywhere where you're drinking water, is to let that run for a little bit before you go ahead and drink. Notice that ice machines are a little bit harder. And so it's good to test them. And then if you find out that if we do have a problem, then we can go ahead and actually remove the device or the ice maker, or the refrigerator, whatever it is that's getting water. So any place, again, there's kitchen faucets. This is probably one that's often overlooked. But anything that's going to go into drinking or cooking, we go ahead and flush that. All right. Remember that each drinking water outlet should be flushed individually. So if you go ahead and you flush your toilets here, like Mr. Plucky Duck, that doesn't flush the entire system. And the individual drinking water, the drinking fountains should be flushed individually. All right, so the EPA has suggested that schools implement programs for reducing lead in drinking water. And so there's a lot of different ways that we do that. But one of the things that you have to know is what your baseline is. What, do you have a problem in your school? And so this means testing. All right, so testing can be a little bit complicated or maybe daunting, but I can assure you that it's actually fairly simple and it's fairly cost effective. It's not very expensive to test for lead. So how do we do this? Where do we test? So again, we have to make an assignment. We have to develop a plan and create a logbook. And once again, I've created a template for you. You can choose to use this or not, but it's just kind of an idea to get you thinking about what you might need. Again, you can have put your school there and your school's lead representative. And on the left, you put in the site that you would like tested and its priority. So the priority can be either high, medium, or low, and we'll go over what those are in just a second. There's a place to write down the test date, the test type, and the result. So you'll have a running total of your results. Now the test type, at the bottom, you can see the key says R for routine, F for flush, and I for investigatory. Routine would just be your regular sampling schedule. If you were to get a result that was high or the one that you didn't like and wanted to do a flush result, you would put that result there. And the flushing result is quite useful, actually. If say, for instance, we were to get a high routine result, and then we asked for a flush result, and the flush result passed, that gives us an indication that that source of contamination is probably in the fixture, because it's in that first bit of water that is caught, which is sat in the fixture overnight. And so that's kind of the reason that we ask for a flush. If we have other problems and we're trying to locate a source of contamination, that's when we might start doing investigatory samples. And again, on the right there's a place for you to make comments to say what you're doing and why you're doing it. And that's just for you. And again, that template is available at that lead and water lead in schools site that we looked at the very start of this. So here's some examples of high priority locations. We have drinking fountains of all size, of all sorts, kitchen sinks with a special reminder not to forget ice makers. So classrooms are used for where they have drinking fountains, classroom sinks, teachers' lounges, anywhere where those sources are normally used for the consumption of water. Here are some medium priority locations. These are kitchen sinks, but maybe that are not used as routinely as a drinking source. You also have bathroom faucets here, which are, again, children may drink from those. Low priority are utility sinks, hose attachments, places like that. It says here, unless they're used to fill up a water jug, that would make them a priority one if they're routinely used. These areas tend to be some of the ones that are kind of the most forgotten, but they're also ones that sit stagnant for the longest amount of time. So you have a greater chance of getting an elevated level of contamination. And then low priority are hot water outlets, because people don't normally drink from a hot water outlet. All right, so once you've gone ahead and built up your sample site plan there, the next step is to actually request sampling bottles. There's a list. Here is a list for you of labs that will take samples from the public. And so you would just call one of these laboratories and request bottles, and they'd send them to you. So then you just go ahead and take the sample, which is actually a pretty easy thing to do. So what you do is you go ahead and take from a source that has sat stagnant for more than 8 hours, but no more than 18. And the idea behind this is we want to get an accurate indication of what it might be like if, say, a child shows up in the morning, goes into school, and takes a drink of water in a pipe, in a water fountain, somewhere that's been sitting overnight. And so the kid will take that very first sip, and we want to know what the concentration is of lead in that very first sip that's been sitting there for more than 6 hours. So we take that. All right, so it's important that we do not allow the water to run for any length of time prior to catching the sample. We want that very first draw to represent the state of those pipes when someone comes in the very first of the morning and makes a pot of coffee, and they just open up the sink and pour all that right into their coffee pot. we want to know what that concentration is. And so that's, in order we do that, we do what's called a first draw sample. And that's what that means, is that we draw that without flushing the pipes at all. All right, the sample should be done from the cold side of the water faucet for two reasons. One is people are more likely to use cold water if they're drinking. And the other reason is that hot water tends to make things more soluble. And so you'd get an uncharacteristically high hit if you did it from the hot water side of the tap. So we ask for the ability to compare apples to apples. Just do it from the cold water side of that thing. Samples for lead in schools, we usually collect 250 milliliters. So in that bottle, there'll be a line, or you fill it up as high as you can. So you fill it up to the line, and then you tightly cap the sample bottle and fill out the label correctly. And that's so that you know where the sample was collected, and when it was collected, and by whom. And then you go ahead and ship it off to the laboratory. And the laboratory, if you choose to, will share the results with us, and we can archive them here on our site, which we recommend that you do for make it easy and nice and transparent for you. All right, now for a little fun. This is our last slide. So, well, second to last anyway, just a little fun. So go ahead and tell me which is the lead pipe. I'll give you just a second to think about it. All right. Obviously, the one up in the upper left is copper. That green oxidation there is called patina and is a dead giveaway of the oxidation of copper. It's copper piping. The one in the upper right is actually a sample of a wooden pipe. There are actually wooden pipes that are still in use in Utah. So I thought that would be kind of a fun thing to show you guys. Okay, now we're down to the two metal pipes. All right, the one on the left, well, I'll tell you, actually, I'll give you a hint on how to tell them apart. One is magnetically active and the other is not. The one on the left is magnetically active. That is an example of galvanized pipe, galvanized steel. When you rub it like that, it stays kind of dull, and that's one of the ways you can tell. See how it's been scratched up and doesn't shine at you? The other way is if you actually get that magnet and put it up to it. So if you chose the one on the bottom right, you are correct. So when you're looking at lead, if you scratch it, and it's pretty easy to scratch and shows you kind of a shiny underneath, and then it's not magnetically active, there's a good chance you're looking at a lead pipe. All right, so this is our actual last slide. Again, there's some contact information for me. I'm Matt Wycoff, lead and copper rule. And there's some other people here that can help you out with some of your other questions on different aspects of dealing with drinking water. And there's a couple of links there for the drinking water site, the leadinwater.utah.gov, which is where you'll go through to take care of a lot of the logistics of actually going through and dealing with lead. And then the water link is where we link through to show you the results. So thank you for the patience and sticking through with us on this. Anyway, thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me or someone else at the Division of Drinking Water. Thank you.